This is Jacqueline Lukeman with the Real News Network. As mostly white people protest against stay-at-home orders in states across the country, not only violating social distancing and mask requirements set forth by state governments, but in many instances aggressively taunting, harassing, or even threatening nurses, state legislators, and even the police, few, if any, arrests are made or even citations handed out for any of those people's actions. But across town, in many of those same cities where the populations are darker and poorer, police are not being as lenient and understanding of violations of social distancing orders, regularly fining, arresting, and even assaulting Black and Latinx people who they claim are not complying. A recent ProPublica report exposes these disparities in how social distancing is enforced in three of the largest jurisdictions in Ohio, Toledo, Columbus, and Cincinnati, where Black people were at least 4 times as likely to be charged with violating the stay-at-home orders as white people. In New York City, videos have surfaced of NYPD officers handing out masks to mostly white visitors in parks, while others used force to arrest people in Black and Latinx neighborhoods. The police department's own data revealed clear racial bias in that 35 of the 40 people who were arrested for violating social distancing regulations in particular were Black, and that more than 90% of people arrested and 82% of those who received summonses for offenses related to the pandemic in general have been Black or Latinx. Several videos have surfaced of Black women and men being either forcibly removed from public transportation or wrestled to the ground in stores or in other public places for not wearing a mask, or are shown being asked to leave a business because they were wearing a mask and were perceived to be suspicious. And those are just the examples of responses to the discriminatory enforcement of social distancing or mask requirements that Black people across the country have experienced. There is still the drumbeat of outright police violence against Black people that continues even amid coronavirus, as a string of police shootings in Indianapolis and Houston in recent weeks prove that to be a persistent issue still. But is police repression against Black, Latinx, and other marginalized communities being made worse because of coronavirus? I don't believe that's entirely true, despite what I'm sure some people would say. Let's remember that we've lived through a long and steady string of cases of the extrajudicial killings of unarmed Black, Latinx, and Native citizens by law enforcement that always claim that something those unarmed people did that caused the heavily armed officers to fear for their lives caused them to shoot them for years, decades, centuries even. With the only new thing in this long, bloody history of abuse being the use of cameras that both film the incidents and share them instantly to social media. Now, that alone has been able to raise awareness to this problem to those who didn't live with it and refused to believe it even happened, and it helped form and grow movements to challenge these incidents as they occur across the country almost instantaneously. And it also provided a springboard for a renewed conversation about whether the system of policing as it exists can be reformed, or whether another model, such as community control over the police, is an idea whose time is overdue. And these mobilizations and conversations are indeed important to have in order to challenge the existing threat of police abuse and violence against Black, Brown, and Native people that has not abated even as the coronavirus spreads. But this does not mean that there is not an effort underway to also use one of the most unprecedented public health crises in modern history to ramp up oppressive policing in general, which would, of course, affect poor Black and Brown communities first and worse. A recent report by The Intercept reveals that the federal government has increased police-related spending in response to the pandemic. The recently implemented CARES Act authorizes $850 million for the Coronavirus Emergency Supplemental Funding Program, a federal grant program that distributed funds to local governments through the Department of Justice to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus domestically or internationally. These funds are allocated to pay for overtime, protective supplies, and other expenses to prepare law enforcement, correctional officers, and police to respond to the pandemic. But crime rates have dropped precipitously. So, what is law enforcement preventing, preparing for, and responding to? Well, unemployment has skyrocketed. Fears about housing security have grown, and now potential food shortages as food processing plants from meat to cheese are reporting outbreaks that fuel lapses in the food supply chain for some foods, which only fuel greater fears about food insecurity. Jail and prison conditions are worsening as the virus spreads among incarcerated populations, and people are growing desperate for answers and relief. And those people are not those folks who are protesting to reopen America. Some of those people might be out there because they genuinely fear for their economic future, sure. But most are just angry at being inconvenienced by having the government tell them that they can't do and go as they please in an effort to stop the spread of this virus. So they translate that as an infringement upon their rights and a violation of their freedom. But the people whose rights and freedom really are being threatened are the people who are the most impacted by the social upheaval this virus is causing: the poor, the workers who cannot afford to stay home because they do not get paid if they do not work, but are terrified of contracting the virus. Their employers aren't paying them real wages anyway, and they aren't getting proper PPE or hazard pay to come to work now. They have never gotten paid sick leave, and they aren't getting it now. They are behind on their rent, and they see no effort by their landlords or their local governments or the federal government to help them with their rent or to stop potential evictions. They're trying to challenge these unjust conditions that they experienced before that have simply become criminal in the face of a global public health crisis, because these issues are now literally matters of life and death for them. And those people in this group are disproportionately poor, Black, and Latinx. So-called experts are predicting a rise in civil unrest due to conditions that they know could easily arise out of a system that is already unequal and unjust and deeply stratified based on race and class, and in which the government that freely provides trillions of dollars in funds to bail out banks and corporations, in a system that provides over $800 million to law enforcement to respond to that predicted civil unrest, but also refuses to provide any more funds beyond a measly one-time payment of $1,200 per person in so-called relief to individuals, leaves those people to have to choose between going back to work and potentially exposing themselves to the virus, or protecting their health and safety and risking hunger and homelessness. These so-called experts know that civil unrest is inevitable. It is, in fact, expected, because the system is designed to create oppressive conditions in order to justify further oppression in the future. While plenty of people across the country are facing difficult realities and choices ahead, can we honestly say that we don't know who would be criminalized for publicly challenging those inhumane choices that are being forced upon them? All you have to do for your answer is look at how law enforcement is responding to the protests going on right now to see that local law enforcement isn't spending any of those newly allocated resources on those people. So who do you think they're saving those resources for? This is Jacqueline Luqman with the Real News Network in the belly of the beast, Washington, D.C.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.